Welcome to the Alterations features for 90.1 in COMcheck training video brought to you by the U.S. Department of Energy. You now can receive 0.10 CEUs towards IECC renewal certification and or 1.0 AIA CES learning units. However, in order to obtain AIA LUs, new AIA requirements dictated tests must be taken. At the end of this training video, you will be directed to a website to take the 10-question test, applicable to AIA members only. You must answer 8 of the 10 questions correctly in order to qualify for the 1.0 learning unit. BECP will report the AIA members who pass the test so credit can be awarded. A certificate of completion will also be available at the end of this training video.
Pacific Northwest National Laboratory presents Alterations feature for 90.1 COMcheck, and our speakers today are Eric Richman and Pam Cole, who both join us from Richland, Washington. Eric is a senior research engineer with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory located in Richland, Washington, and is involved with building energy efficiency and energy code development. Eric is currently a member of the ASHRAE 90.1 Energy Code Development Committee and is familiar with national commercial energy codes and their application. Pam is a research engineer with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory as well, and she oversees the Department of Energy's Building Energy Codes Program technical assistance to users on national energy code inquiries and the suite of BECP tools and services. She is also one of BECP's lead trainers and has performed numerous energy code and software trainings to various stakeholder groups. I would like to welcome both of you to today's program, and Pam, the audience is all yours.
Thank you, Jack. This is the first training session of a new feature that we have in COMcheck for Alterations. This is the first tool also developed to assist builders, architects, engineers, designers on showing compliance to existing commercial buildings that they're renovating. And this tool is only available right now through the desktop version. So where can you go download and get it? At our website, www.energycodes.gov. And also our tech support email address is up there at the right-hand or the top of the screen, that if you have any questions related to the software or any code-related questions, you can submit your inquiry in through that tech support email. Now, just an overview of all the tools that the Building Energy Codes program offers is the desktop version, which we're going to discuss today, and this new feature. And this feature, again, is only available in the desktop version. We also have the web-based tools of COMcheck, and this is on the commercial side. The COMcheck web version is similar to the desktop, and it requires no download. It has all the same code options, and eventually it will also have the alterations feature embedded into it later on in this year. The COMcheck package generator is the prescriptive approach where you can actually customize your building envelope construction and pick from a series of packages that will allow you to show compliance. And then there's also printed materials that you can manually print out and manually fill out the forms, the compliance guides, and prescriptive tables. So when does COMcheck apply? COMcheck is for all commercial buildings for alterations now, for additions and new construction, except for single-family and low-rise multifamily, which is less than 3 stories in height. And when else does COMcheck apply? Now, it doesn't apply to everyone because every state has a different code. So what if you don't know what code is applicable within your state? Then you can go out to our website and go to the status of state codes and click on the state in which your project is in and determine whether COMcheck can be used. It will also tell you what the current codes are within that state. And it also has pertinent information for any links to more information on their specific state page or other references that you might want to go out and look for, maybe some energy incentives that they might have applicable within that state. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to get into details about what are the alterations requirements and how the alterations actually came about in the history of it. So I'm going to take it over to Eric, and he's going to go through a series of slides that will pertain to the actual code requirements that deals with alterations.
Thanks, Pam. I wanted to talk, as Pam mentioned, about what's actually in the code. for alterations and what the actual requirements are to kind of help understand how this works in the software as well. Alterations and renovations, or remodels as they're often called, are covered in the major nationally adopted energy codes. They've been in the IECC code since 2000 version, and they've been in ASHRAE 90.1 since the 1999 version. Historically, as you may be aware, energy code compliance has primarily been focused on new construction. Alterations have sometimes been ignored, although as energy codes get adopted more in states and more strict codes get adopted, alterations becomes more in the forefront. You'll see a lot more compliance required for that. And of course, application enforcement for all codes, including alterations portions, are up to the local or state code official. So if there are any discrepancies or items not covered in the code, that's your first place to go as the local building official and see if there's some resolution there. What I'd like to do now is cover what's required in both of the nationally available codes, the IECC and ASHRAE 90.1. Looking at IECC first, there are fairly straightforward requirements in IECC. For the 2000 and 2003 versions, there's just a simple statement that says altered components must meet new construction requirements. And in the 2004 version, it's similar, same requirement, but they added a few exceptions for items where it simply didn't make sense to require full compliance. One of them being storm windows. If you add a storm window to an existing window, you don't have to show compliance. That's exempted. If you are replacing just glazing only in an existing frame or sash, you also don't have to show any compliance. That's exempted. And a third one in IECC, insulation cavities that are not exposed or that are already filled. In other words, if you are doing a remodel and you don't affect or you don't expose the cavity, or you do and it's already filled with insulation, no compliance is required. And of course, there are a couple of standard exemptions for the entire code that if these comply, you don't have to show compliance. One of them is low energy use, and another one is a historical building. If it's on a historical register, you don't have to show compliance. Well, one other point on the IECC before we go to ASHRAE 9.1, because of its simplicity and limited exceptions, there's really not a lot of difference between full building compliance and alterations in IECC, and therefore the COMcheck software does not include IECC, only 90.1. So moving to the 90.1 requirements, which are a little more detailed, the 1999 through 2004 versions, again, a similar requirement. They have to meet the new construction requirements, but with quite a series of exceptions, again, for cases where it just doesn't make sense for full compliance. And these are, there are exceptions in envelope, HVAC, water heating, and lighting. Also the same standard exemptions for low energy use and for historical buildings, historic buildings. A few other points on the requirements. It applies to the affected components only. So if you're not touching the roof, for example, there are no roof requirements. If you're just doing walls and lighting, then that's the only portions you have to be concerned with. And cosmetic treatments do not trigger the compliance requirements. If you're just doing wallpaper or painting or something that doesn't expose any of the energy components, no compliance is required. There's also another, some people might call an exception, it's another compliance path, full building, whole building modeling, which is available as part of new construction compliance, is also available for alterations. If you show by whole building modeling that you're meeting the energy code, that complies as well. So let's go over each of these four areas, envelope, HVAC, water heating, and lighting, and look at the actual exemptions. For envelope, there are a series of them. Again, storm windows, which we mentioned for IECC. If you're adding a storm window or if you're replacing a storm window, there's no compliance required. That's just an add-on. If you are replacing the glazing only, again, similar to IECC, the compliance is not required. However, for 90.1, there's a kicker here in that the U value and solar heat gain coefficient must be at least as good for the new window you're putting in that's replacing the old window. It can't be any worse. But as long as that condition is met, there's no other requirements for compliance. If you're replacing the window with the frame and sash, a complete window unit, and you're replacing less than 25% of them, then again, there are no full compliance required. However, the U value and solar heat gain coefficient must be at least as good in that case. On insulation cavities, roof, wall, whatever it happens to be, if the cavity is already filled with an R of 3 per inch insulation, typical fiberglass and those kind of materials, or if the cavity remains unexposed, then there's no compliance required. On a roof membrane, only replacement. If all you're doing is replacing the membrane and you're not exposing the above deck insulation, no compliance is required. Or if you have a roof that has below deck insulation, you can replace anything above the deck and you're not exposing the insulation, so no compliance is required. A final one on doors. If you replace a door in an area where typically a vestibule would be required in new construction, you don't have to add the vestibule if you're just replacing the door. That covers the envelope. Let's move on to HVAC and water heating exceptions. If you have a piece of equipment that you're just repairing or modifying, and that the modification or repair does not increase its energy use or decrease its efficiency, then no compliance is required. If you are modifying or making changes or putting in a new piece of equipment, but extensive revision to other systems that are not being affected would have to be made to meet compliance to the code, then you are exempted also. And these are going to be odd cases. You have to check with your building official to make sure of that. If you're just changing a refrigerant on a piece of equipment, say the refrigerant on a heat pump system, compliance is not required. If you're relocating a piece of equipment, for example, taking a rooftop unit, moving it to another part of the building to serve a different zone, that does not trigger any compliance. Also on water heaters and ductwork and piping for water heaters and systems, if there's insufficient clearance, say, to meet the insulation requirements, if you simply don't have the room, then you're also exempted in that case. That covers HVAC and water heating. Let's look at lighting. Lighting is fairly straightforward with one major exemption. If you are replacing less than 50% of the luminaires in a space, and this is on a space-by-space basis, then you don't have to show compliance. However, you must not increase the energy use. Now, again, this is on a space-by-space basis, so if you're replacing all the lights in the office areas, but only 20% of them in the lobby, then office would need to show compliance, but the lobby would not. And another note, just for clarification, if you're replacing, for example, all the ballasts in your building, or all the lamps and ballasts, but the fixtures remain the same, that is not considered an alteration or a renovation. That's more on the line of a repair, and therefore no compliance is required in that case. That covers the exemptions, so I'd like to pass it back over to Pam, and she's going to show you how this all works in the software.
As a reminder to everyone, when you're looking at the screen, there are some scroll bars. If you can't see everything visible that we're talking about, use those scroll bars, or go up to the View menu and click on Autofit Setting. So it'll be a drop-down menu that you'll see for Autofit Setting, and that will probably clarify some of these screens, because when I get into demoing the software, well, you're going to see a lot of new columns, and I don't want you to miss out on some of these columns that I might be discussing. So use those features on your desktop so you can see everything that I'm discussing today. This is just a screenshot of COMcheck, and I bring this up because if you are a first-time user of COMcheck and you've downloaded the desktop version, that the loading bar down in the middle of the screen will run across, and sometimes it might take a few seconds the first time you upload this program, so be a little patient with it. Once you've uploaded it for the first time, then it'll load every time a little bit faster. Now, the alterations feature in COMcheck is only applicable to certain 90.1 standards. And from the code menu at the top, you'll see in the red that circled are the ones that are applicable to having this feature allowed. And that is 90.199, 90.1-2001, and 90.1-2004. So if one of those standards are applicable that you can show compliance to within your location, and you can use the alterations feature, then those are the ones that you could use. What happens when you choose alterations from the project tab in COMcheck is that you're going to have some more information that is applicable. First off, when you click on alterations in the red circle, you're going to get space conditioning types that are mandatory that you choose your space conditioning type for your project. Now, if you have a mixed-use building and you're doing alterations to a mixed-use building, you're going to have a separate report, separate compliance report for each one of those spaces. there is different criteria for space conditioning type. There's a lot of greater investment in energy efficiency for residential buildings because they're assumed to be conditionally or continuously conditioned. So therefore, make sure if you're doing alterations to a mixed-use building that you are separating out your reports. Another thing I want to mention is confusion on, well, is this an addition or is this an alteration? Or do I call this new construction? The criteria, or I should say the easy way to determine whether it's an addition or whether you can use alterations is if you're adding square footage to an existing space, it's an addition. For alterations, even if you are going from an unconditioned building to a conditioned building, you can consider it an alteration and use this feature, but none of the exemptions for every component can apply to that space. You have to treat it as though it is no exemptions and it's going to go from an unconditioned to a condition, so you need to go with the new requirements that I'll show you in the software. And my last screenshot before I get into the live demonstration is, this is a little bit different for COMcheck users that they're probably used to knowing that they cannot get compliance using new construction or additions in COMcheck without describing their building type. Now in the alterations piece, you won't describe your building type anymore. You describe your building type actually by space conditioning type. But the area categories are only used for lighting. If you're not doing lighting alterations, then you're not going to enter any categories into those drop-down spaces there. If you're doing lighting, then you have to enter every space that you're altering because lighting alterations are done on a space-by-space basis. And last but not least, if you have questions relating to how the tool works, how do you do your inputs for each component, and any of the definitions or space conditioning types, if you want to go look up the definition, go to the help section at the top, click on the help menu, and then you'll see over on the left-hand side I've circled alterations. You can click on alterations and you're going to get all the features and the how-tos of how to use this tool within COMcheck. Now I'm going to go over and I need to go to another sharing application. I'm going to pull up COMcheck so we can play around with it a little bit. All right. First off, the first thing at the very top, and I'm just going to go over a couple basics real quickly, is that right now the code at the very top is defaulted to the 2003 IECC. And if you look down a project type, you'll see you're not going to see the option for alterations. It's only when you choose between those 90.1 standards that I explained earlier where you will get that feature that will appear that you can choose. So let me click on the code menu, and we're going to change it to 90.1 2004. And when I do that, then you see that there's some new information that appears where I can come in and click on alterations. And it's going to ask me a couple questions, or it's actually going to say, do you really have an alteration? Is this an existing building that you're touching part of the building envelope for lighting? What are you doing? Or do you really have an addition? Just some little clarification, because there is a lot of confusion when you're dealing with in between the addition and the alterations piece. Now the next screen that's going to appear is those space conditioning types. This is the only time you're going to see them where you're going to have to define them is when you've chose alterations. So we're going to leave it on non-residential. Some other features that are new to the most recent release of the desktop software and the web-based one is we've changed some project details. And over on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's title, site, permit, owner, agent, and so forth, and you really can't click in there. You need to go up and click on the Edit Project Details button, and then those tabs will appear, and this is where you're going to enter your information that you want to show up on your report. And so I'm entering some information here on what I want to have that's going to show up on my report. I can come over to owner, agent, and also do the same thing and enter any of my information. And designer contractors, if you have more than one designer contractor, you can put them down in the notes. It only has a field for one there, but you can put as much information as you like down in the notes section. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then it'll populate it down into the title, site, permit, the sitting in the project tab, and all that information that you put into those project details. So now let's go over and I'm going to click on over where the area category is, because the building that I'm going to define today is actually a hotel motel renovation. And So I'm going to have some lighting, of course, because we want to show lighting to you. And I'm going to start defining some of these lighting types into the hotel motel. And I'm going to start with the hotel lobby area. And I'm going to put 3,000 square feet. I'm going to click on Add Category. I'm going to add 3 space categories so we can play around with this a little bit. I'm going to enter the dining area of 15,000 square feet. And then one more category. Click on the Add Category button one more time. Click on the arrow button that gives me the drop-down list. And I'll click on Guest Rooms at 20,000 square feet. So now I'm going to come over to the envelope. And in the envelope, it looks similar to the COMcheck that we have for new construction and additions. However, there are some new features. These are not compatible either. So when I start defining my alterations to my building envelope, I can't switch over to new construction. It won't save your data. This is a standalone feature in COMcheck. It should be saved as its own project in COMcheck. So don't get confused that you can switch in between new construction and alterations and all the data will remain the same. It won't. How alterations work in here is there are no trade-offs. You have to show compliance individually for every component that you're altering. So let's take a look at roofs. In this hotel motel, they are going to be replacing the roof down to the roof deck. So what do I want to define when I click on roof and I see the drop-down list of assembly types? This column right here that says post-alteration assembly, this is where you're defining your new assembly, not the pre-assembly, but the new one. So let's assume that this is an attic roof with steel joists. And when I click on that, as you will see with every component that you're altering, you're going to get a screen that's going to come up with some more information. And these come from 90.1. And what they're going to define for you is, do you have any exemptions to this roof area that you can claim? And if you do, of course, you're going to click on one of these buttons here. The first one, that's not going to apply to us. I'm saying that this roof is being replaced down to the roof deck. And I'm also saying that the cavity is going to be completely filled with a minimum of R3 insulation. And if I can meet that criteria, then I'm going to click on that button there for that exemption, and I'm going to hit OK. And what happens when I do that is some other columns that are a little bit different is the alterations detail column that sits up here at the top. And it will say in here either exemption applies or compliance is required. And since I had an exemption that applies to this roof, it'll define it here, but it's also going to provide you the exemption that you called out for, the roof cavity filled with a minimum of R3 per inch insulation. This will show up on your compliance report. This will be submitted to your building department for them to review and go, okay, I see that, and when we go and inspect it, we're going to look for this. Let's get over to skylights. Since we're replacing the roof down to the roof deck, let's assume that they're replacing all the skylights in this building. So I'm going to click on skylight, and again, I'm determining, or I'm going to define what my post-alteration is of my skylights. So let's say that they're a vinyl frame, double pane, clear with curb. And once I've done that, again, I get that alterations detail screen that's going to come up and say, do you have any exemptions to this skylight? So let's assume that we are replacing all the skylights. So I'm looking at, am I just replacing the glazing and I'm leaving the frame? No, I'm not doing that. Am I replacing just 25% of the existing skylight area? That includes the frame? No, we're replacing all of them. So we're going to go under the no exemptions. And when you fall under no exemptions for any of the components that you're altering, of course, more information is going to come up, and it's going to be the actual compliance requirements that would be applicable to that component. For glazing, the glazing requirements come from the prescriptive tables in 90.1. And how are those determined? Well, it's based on location for one, and it's also based on your space conditioning type. And for glazing, it's based on your percentage. So down below, it's asking you, well, for your post-alteration, what is that percentage that you're replacing? Because if you're over 5% by 90.1, then it's throwing you over to a performance-based tool, and you cannot use COMcheck to do it. But if you're under, then you need to define it. So I'm clicking on the drop-down button that says 0 to 2 or up to 5. What are you replacing here? And let's assume that it's 2%. And down below, you can't touch these they're grayed out, but it's giving you the maximum U factor and maximum solar heat gain coefficient that you must meet for your replacement skylights. If you don't meet them, then you're not going to be in compliance. So let's go ahead and click OK. Now what happens when I do that is it's brought up the skylight, and it's defined what my post-alteration is. And when I talked about under alteration details, now the first one says exemption applies, and it listed what it was. But since we don't have an exemption for our skylight, it is now saying compliance is required. You need more information here. So what is in red is bad, or red means you need to do something, is that I need to define what is my proposed U factor and solar heat gain for these skylights. And if you have the manufacturer specs, then you're going to enter those details here. Let's say that it's a 0.66, and then that it's a 0.35 on the solar heat gain. Now, if those values were higher than my maximum, what would happen would be that down in the right-hand bottom of the screen, envelope would not be saying passes, it would say fails. And which brings up a good point here. The COMcheck for new construction and additions, the calculation down on the right-hand bottom of the screen does not, it provides a compliance calculation for the entire building envelope that you're defining. Now, in the alterations piece, the pass-fail, if it's saying fails, that could mean that one component is failing. Maybe not all of them are, but how it determines that you're failing is you need to go up and look. If it's saying failing, that doesn't mean every component's failing. Look for something in red and see where and what component is not meeting the criteria that you're defining. So now we've done skylights, let's go over to exterior walls. And again, the drop-down list, you will define what your post-alteration is. Let's say it's steel frame, 24-inch on center. And more screens will appear. Do you have an exemption for this? And let's say that we don't have any exemptions again, and let's see what happens here. Again, those mandatory requirements, since I have no exemptions, I need to meet full code compliance. And it will list for you the maximum U factor for that component that you need to meet. So it's provided it there, 01.24, or I should say 0.124, and I'm going to hit OK. And it's coming up to the alteration screen where it says compliance required. Now I have some different values that I need to enter. It's in red. The proposed U factor is in red. That means I'm not meeting code at this point. And down on the right-hand bottom of the screen, as I mentioned, it says envelope fails. The only thing that's failing at this point is that I have not entered the rest of my information for this wall, so it's failing. I need to insulate this steel frame wall. So let's say that we're filling this steel frame wall with R13 and see if we can get ourselves into compliance. So I'm putting R13 under cavity. I'm doing cavity insulation. I'm not doing any rigid foam board where there's no thermal break, so I'm going to leave that at 0. And I am meeting compliance now, so I'm going to leave it as is, and that's what I'm proposing to do with my exterior walls. Since I'm modifying my exterior walls, I might as well go replace all those old windows that are in those walls, right? So I'm going to click on Windows, and I'm going to define what my new windows are going to be. So I'm going to say they're vinyl frame, double pane, low E. Let's say they're clear and fixed. And again, do any of these exemptions apply to me? Let's play around with some of these buttons. These are similar to the skylight because it's based upon your glazing percentage. So let's take a look at, if I just clicked on the first one and said, I'm not replacing the glazing, I'm just putting storm windows. If I click on that storm window exemption, it'll actually just bring it up into my spreadsheet, and it'll say, exemption applies, and this is what it is. Let's go to the next one because we're going to see some more information appear that you need to enter. And this one is, am I replacing just the glazing and I'm leaving the framing? When I click on that, now it wants to know, okay, if you're doing that, then your post-alteration needs to be better than your pre-alteration U factor and solar heat gain. So you need to provide what your U factor is for your pre-alteration. Now, if this is an old building and you don't have those values, what can you do? The cursor's down in there in the U factor column, and I'm going to click in there, and I'm going to right-click with my mouse, and I'm going to select the defaults. Where are these defaults coming from? They're coming from 90.1, and you can use them. So let's assume that the existing windows are metal frame, single pane, and I'm going to click OK. Same with the solar heat gain. I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to select default, and let's come over to metal and say single pane, and this is the solar heat gain default, and I'm going to click OK. Now, the post-alteration, this is where it gets a little more, I would say, more detail that you need to think about when you're replacing the existing glazing and you're leaving the framing. Because where are you going to get the value for that glazing? It's going to be the center of glass, right? Well, how are you going to account for this post-alteration for the overall U factor and solar heat gain for that component? Either you're working with the manufacturer and trying to determine the calculation for the glazing and the framing, or more than likely the glazing that you're replacing is going to be a lot better than what was existing there, and you can use the default tables from 90.1, and they should be better than what was originally in the building. And so let's assume that it's double pane. Let's keep it at metal frame. Let's say it was double pane. And you'll see that value is better. They're not favorable. You're still using defaults. But if that's your only case that you can use, if you're just replacing the glass, because it might be that if you're using the U factor for the center glass, that might not get you there. So this is a case where you're going to spend a little bit more time with making sure that you're putting in the right values. And if you are calculating that you're only replacing the glass and you're leaving the framing, that you're putting in the right correction and the right calculation for your U factor and solar heat gain. Typically, alterations, they're replacing the entire frame and glass, but this is in 90.1. This is allowed, and it's just something that you're going to have to make sure you pay attention to. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, but let's get out of here and let's go back over to our exemptions. And let's go to that we are replacing, let's say we're replacing only 20% of the glass in this building. So this exemption that I'm replacing less than 25% would apply. So let's click that. And down below, again, it's asking you for the pre-alteration and post-alteration. Well, we've already defined it because I went to the defaults. And now my post-alteration, let's click in here and let's assume that the post-alteration is that vinyl double frame low E glass that I put up into the spreadsheet up here. And let's define that glazing out to be 0.33 for the U factor and 0.35 for the solar heat gain. Now, what else it's asking me for is, well, I want to know, and I want you to input as the user the percentage of glazing, vertical glazing, that you're replacing. And if you put something higher than 25, it's going to beep out at you and say, no, you're not meeting compliance. You might have to click on no exemptions. So it won't let you put anything higher than 25, put it that way. So we're assuming 20%. So I will put 20 in there. And that 20% is going to appear on your report. So when it goes to the building official and he's looking at your plans, then he goes out in the field, he can see all that information. That's what's great about this tool. This is the first tool of its kind that is allowing the users that are providing this information to the building department for them to actually have a piece of paper and say, hey, okay, this is great. Now I'm seeing that they're altering this piece, and now we have something that we can actually go out and inspect, and I have some criteria that comes from a code that's applicable within their state that they can use. Well, this is the basics of the building envelope. The components, if you do have an exemption, the criteria falls to the prescriptive tables. They'll either provide a maximum U factor on that component, or if it's glazing, it's going to provide a maximum U factor and solar heat gain that you need to meet. And then again, of course, you need to input your insulation levels for like your roof, your exterior walls, if you had any interior walls, basement, below grade walls, and floor. Let's jump over to lighting. Now with lighting, this is a little slick because what it's done, different than COMcheck for new construction and additions, is that when in my project tab, when I defined out my spaces, it automatically populates them over here into my lighting schedule. And as you see, the click here in red means, well, you need to start defining what either you're altering everything in that space, or if you have an exemption, you need to define what you're doing in every one of those spaces, because 90.1 designates that requirements are space by space. So let's go ahead and click on the first one, the lobby. And again, it's going to ask you, pretty straightforward, am I altering less than 50%? I'm not increasing the installed wattage, or do I have no exemptions? I don't meet that. And we're going to put no exemptions and hit OK. And it's going to give you a little teaser saying no fixtures are specified. What do I do? Well, you need to make sure that you're highlighted on that space, which we are, and you're going to come up the same as the original feature in COMcheck, and start defining all your fixtures. Now, this is not just your new fixtures for that space. you need to put in existing and new and see if you're going to meet compliance for the entire space. So let's start defining out some fixtures in this space. Let's do metal halide, 75 watt, electronic, 1 lamp, let's say 50 fixtures, oh, not 500, and 80 for fixture wattage. Let's put one more in here. Let's put some compact fluorescents, let's say twin tube 13 watt electronic, and 1 lamp, 14 fixtures, and a wattage of 15. Now, let's say we're done with this space for the hotel motel lobby. What's happening is, by compliance required, it's calculated your allowed wattage at 3,300. That's based upon watts per square foot for that space. My proposed wattage is 4,210. Now, if this was the only space that I was doing compliance with, I wouldn't be passing. But let's look down at the bottom right-hand corner, and this looks similar to the existing COMcheck for new construction, but it is a little different, meaning I have a proposed wattage here of 4,210. I'm not done because I have some more spaces, and my allowed wattage, which is quite big, is 44,800. So I'm not failing, because what you can do when you're doing alterations for several spaces is I can do trade-offs in between those spaces. So right now I'm not failing, because my next space, the difference in between my allowed and proposed for the hotel motel lobby, maybe I'm going to make up for it in my dining room area. So let's click on the dining room. Let's start entering some spaces here. Let's say we don't have any exemptions. I'm going to hit OK. So let's start defining some. Now I have to be highlighted on that area, because it will start dropping in your lighting fixtures in the one that is highlighted. So be careful when you start defining out your spaces and your criteria for your fixtures. So let's go up here to linear, and let's put in some super T8s. Let's say they're electronic, 3 lamps. We'll put 32 fixtures and a wattage of 82. Let's add one more in there. I'll do compact fluorescent, twin tube, 18 watt, all electronic, 2 lamps. Let's put a lot more fixtures in here, and 38 wattage. Now again, I've made up some difference here, because my proposed wattage is 15,000, allowed is 19. I'm still passing if you look down in the bottom right-hand corner. And my overall proposed is way lower than my allowed. But let's go click on the hotel motel guest room and see if this falls under an exemption. Now I've clicked it, and let's say that we are exempt, that we're going to replace maybe 20% of the fixtures in that area. So let's click on less than. Now I get some more information when I do that, because you need to define out, well, if you are replacing, I want to know what you're replacing to make sure you're meeting that criteria. And it wants to know total number of fixtures for the pre-alteration. So let's put in 20,000. And the pre-alteration, 10,000 for the wattage. Now what's the number of fixtures that I'm replacing? Let's say it's 200 and 9,000 for the wattage. Now pay attention to what happens when I click OK, because down on the allowed wattage that I'm circling over with my cursor is 44,800. What that is, that's your watts per square foot for every space that I've entered. But when I have an exemption for a space, it's going to subtract it back out, because that doesn't apply anymore. You're not going to get that for compliance for your other spaces. So I click OK. That brings that allowed wattage down. I'm still meeting compliance because my proposed is lower than my allowed. And it brings up here and it says exemption applies under alterations detail, and that it passes by an exemption. Now, the information that I input on there will show up on the report for the plan reviewer. So he can see exactly what you're doing in that space when he goes out and inspects it. That is the basis for lighting. So let's go over to mechanical. Now, mechanical I'm not going to spend a lot of time with, because depending on how complex your system is, sometimes this is going to have to be reviewed with your code official, whether you fall under some of those exemptions, because they can be kind of vague. And basically, COMcheck still works the same for alterations. It's not a pass or fail. If you are doing a repair, so let's go ahead and show that. I'm going to put in a rooftop package unit. I'll say it's single zone, and okay. Of course, you get all those exemptions again. Let's say it's a repair. then I hit OK. It is just going to put on your report, this is a repair, the exemption applies, this is his unit. The select here, it's not in red, and it's optional. You don't have to put in the equipment capacity type because you're exempt. But if you want to show it, great. That might even help the plan reviewer. So if you wanted to show those capacities, that you could. But let me show you if it wasn't exempt. Let's put another system in. I'll do the same system, a rooftop single. And I'm looking at the exemptions, and let's say this is a full replacement new system, and I need to meet all the requirements from 90.1. I'm going to hit no exemptions, and I'm going to hit OK. Now you'll see that the select is in red because now you need to put in the equipment capacity, and you will need to make sure that you are meeting all the mandatory requirements and all the mechanical requirements that come from 90.1. Those will show up on the report for you. But again, this isn't a pass or fail. So mechanical is pretty straightforward. Either you meet one of the exemptions or you treat it as new install. Let's go back over to the project screen, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up a data file that I created so we can play around with a full project, which was in your presentation for an example of a hotel-motel renovation. So I'm going to click on the white paper that's up there that says new, and it says, do I want to save any of these changes? No, I don't want to save them. So then I'm going to go up to File, and I'm going to open up one of my recent data files. I'm going to give it a second so everyone can see what I'm seeing. Again, use those scroll bars or go up to View and Autofit if you can't see all this. So the code at the top is 90.1. Alterations are already clicked on. My location's already picked for Louisiana. I have filled in all my detail information of where this project is. My lighting categories, you see I have an additional lighting category for common space types, the corridors. But I love doing examples that show everything failing because it makes it funner to try to get it into compliance. So down in the right-hand bottom of the screen, envelope fails, lighting fails. So let's go take a look and see what we can do to get that envelope into compliance. And again, you're looking for what is in red. This isn't full building envelope compliance anymore. You're doing it component by component. So that doesn't mean that all of them are failing. You need to go look for the one that is. And, of course, if you have exemption applies, then you know that that one isn't one that's failing. So the next one down, which is in red, is that solar heat gain requirement isn't meeting the maximum solar heat gain. So let's change that. Let's say, user error, it should have been 0.35. And I'm going to put 0.35 in there and click, and now I'm passing the envelope. Pretty straightforward for what you need to do for if you have a component pass not passing in the envelope. Let's go over to the lighting. Now in the lighting, I'm failing. If I look down at my allowed wattage and my proposed wattage is higher. So I might have to go back to my lighting schedule and go, okay, what did I do? Can I do some trade-offs in between these spaces? Where do I need to work on getting this into compliance? And now we have a new category for common type spaces that's been added here. But you know what? I'm looking on my lighting schedule, and I have incandescents here that I'm going to click on and highlight. And I'm going to click on the fixture description for one, because you know what? I forgot those are. They're chandeliers, and they're decorative. And by gosh, there's an allowance in 90.1, and I want to make sure that I account for it. But I need to come up to Options and click on Exemptions and Allowances. And if you don't see this column, scroll over so you can see this new column that will appear that's Exemption and Allowances. Another slick thing that you can do, because in lighting you're going to start getting a lot of columns when you're doing your schedules, your lighting compliance schedules in here for your spaces, is in between component and alteration details, a little arrow button right there, kind of like Excel. I can move that over. So I can actually move my columns and make them a little bit smaller so I can see everything on my desktop while I'm working in the lighting. So now that I move that over, let's go down. Let's look at the chandeliers that I'm working with and say, hey, nope, those are allowance. I'm coming to allowance, the drop down, and go decorative appearance. Now the floor area. Am I entering the 3,000 square feet for the entire lobby? Well, no, not unless those chandeliers are defined through that entire lobby. I'm only going to put the floor area that's applicable to those chandeliers. And on this lighting schedule, it's only 1,000 square feet. It's not 3,000. That's the only allowance that should be applicable for that space. So I'm going to put 1,000 and click OK. Now, what happened is that I got an allowance down under allowed wattage for that space. So now I am passing. A mechanical, again, nothing's really passing or failing, so we don't want to play around with it too much. And let's go back and close this out. And I'm going to show you now that we have a passing project, what the reports look like. They are a little bit different than new construction or additions. So now I need to go over to another application, so bear with me a moment. And I'm going to open up what the reports look like. Now the reports are in PDF format. If any of you are familiar with our most recent COMcheck desktop and web tool, that reports now are converted into a PDF, and you can submit them directly to your building department electronically from the desktop tool and from the web tool, and save them as a PDF in your files. Now I'm going to be a little slow about scrolling on this compliance certificate so everyone can see just a basic overview of some new information that you'll see on these reports. So let's go down to the section 2, general information. Now as a plan reviewer, they're going to also want to pay careful attention to this because they might get a report in and think it's just the same reports because it does look the same as for new construction. And they need to look under this general information. For one, well, they need to make sure the right code has been chosen that they're showing compliance to, but you're going to see some new information appear, meaning what is the building type? Now you have non-residential here. It could be semi-heated, it could be residential. But that's a new column, that's some new information that appears for alterations. The project type will say alteration. And then also the skylight roof percent and the percent window glass door area replaced. This is some information that means something in this project they're doing with skylights, which is the skylight to roof area percentage is 2%, which is it needs to be less than 5, or they're going to performance-based tool. And they're proposing that they are replacing 20% of the existing vertical glazing. And in the details of the schedule of the building envelope, they should be defining that out in this report. The activity types, again, are for the lighting, but it's defined them out below. That's kind of similar to the existing reports if you were to define your building type. Now I'm going to scroll down and stop and look at the requirements checklist. And it's similar, but the thing that is different is the components that you defined. If you have an exemption, such as the roof, then you're not going to see an R value for cavity continuous, and you're not going to see a proposed and maximum allowed for any of the rest of the information because it will define out what the exemption is. For the skylights, of course, you're going to put in what you're proposing in, and it has to meet the maximum allowed. So this is information just a little bit different than for new construction, and the building official will have to pay careful attention to make sure that the exemptions really are applicable to those components. Let's scroll down to the lighting. All of these, the other information that I'm scrolling past quickly is the mandatory requirements and applicable information and where you would sign your report. So let's get into the lighting and take a look. Project information is similar, but the general information again is project type shows it as an alteration. Scroll down some more. And let's take a look at the activity area type. Now these are exemption qualifications. And the only exemption that we had was for the hotel, motel, guest rooms. So this is the only one that will appear. All the activity types will appear here. So if you're reviewing this as the report, then you're looking at the lighting schedule and making sure, okay, that's true. This is the only space that they do have an exemption. And the information I put in there on the pre and post, total wattage, and the fixtures for what I'm replacing shows up here, as I mentioned. The requirements checklist is basically the same as if it was new construction for your switching and so forth. Let's scroll down some more. All same information where you can sign it and so forth. I'm just showing you the new things that show up for alterations. And let's look at this lighting application worksheet. Now on the worksheet, the allowed lighting power calculation is allowed lighting power, meaning this is only showing where the allowances appeared. And if you look down under hotel, motel, lobby, that allowance for decorative appearance is showing up. That's where that calculation is. All of the other allowances are showing 0 because we didn't have any for any of the other spaces. Let's scroll down some more. Now, under the actual lighting power calculation, similar to the existing COMcheck, it's going to define out all of your fixtures. And it will define it, though, for every space and the square footage for each one of those spaces, which makes it really nice. But it provides the over total actual watts, and down below on your compliance calculation, it's going to say total allowed, total actual, project compliance, and what if you're passing. Mechanical, again, is more straightforward. It's going to, the section 2 of mechanical will have that alteration in there for your project type. And then it's going to list out your mechanical, and if you have an exemption, and if you didn't, it's going to start listing the requirements applicable to that system as though you're doing new installs. And that is all on the report as far as what is new for alterations. So let's go back over. Again, if you have questions and comments, there's 2 avenues to do that. I gave you the tech support email that you can take down. And then if you forget that or you don't write it down, if you go out to our website, there is a help desk online electronic form that you can go to, fill out your name, and submit your question that way, and they come right in, and we will answer them. Thank you for attending our session today.
This ends the training video. If you would like to take the test to receive AIA credit and or print a certificate of completion, please write down the URL shown on the screen. You will need to type this URL into your internet browser. Thank you.